Budget 2019 will be debated in the National Assembly come Monday, the 3rd of December, and various aspects of the budget are being examined in these programs as we go along. I'm Nia Suban, and joining me today in the studios are two medical doctors, one being the former Minister of Health to my far left, Dr. Bheri Ramsarran, and to my immediate left, Dr. Frank Anthony, former Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport. Both are currently members of Parliament for the PPP in opposition. Doctors, let me welcome you to examining Budget 2019. Let me start with the former Health Minister, Dr. Bheri Ramsarran, and we only have half hour. So briefly, in terms of from the perspective of the Ministry of Health, in providing effective health care to Guyanese across the country, how confident are you that Budget 2019 can be able to deliver those services?
Well, I'll tell you this. The current government is basing some of their plans or projections on what we left there. But we're anxious and we're kind of suspicious that they cannot interpret it or get it right, as it were. So if they were to follow our plan, which was submitted some time back, we're confident that we've left in place this personnel, for example, thousands of doctors we train in Cuba, to achieve it. The point is now, in opposition, we have to be vigilant to see that the things they committed to when they accepted our plan, Vision 2020 health plan, they said openly in Parliament that they're continuing that plan. We now have to hold them up to that. For example, I noticed that the repair of buildings sometimes, or the purchase and the procurement process in the health sector are not up to standard, are not what we would want. So although they've accepted that our plan was good, Vision 2020, we're anxious and we're suspicious that the execution is wanting.
All right, we're going to come back to the procurement process, but if you're saying then that they are in some way staying true, in some way, to plans that that PPP would have had, in some way that should be seen as a good thing from your perspective then?
Well, the inertia, right? The inertia that we created. For example, we trained almost 1,000 doctors. Those doctors just don't disappear. They're in the system. The deployment is what we have to look at, the effective deployment. Are they being housed properly? Are their buildings being repaired? Are they being given the medications and the medical supplies to work with? So the inertia that we created, remember 500 doctors trained, they came back, they haven't disappeared, they're there. How are they being managed? Some of them are discontented with how their contracts are being managed. Some of them were reverted to the old system, for example, where they had negotiated themselves another system. So we're looking at that, and we're saying yes, the positive things that we did. And what we're looking at too, elections in 2020 are not far off. So when we take back power in 2020, we have a strong foundation to get things back again. But the procurement process is being corrupted.
All right, let me bring in Dr. Anthony here specifically on that aspect of the discussions. We have seen in the media over time in terms of shortage of drugs for whatever reason. We've also seen some stories pertaining to alleged unacceptable practices, financial practices, as it relates to procurement. First of all, does Budget 2019 cater, in your estimation, for a reduction of shortages of drugs across the country?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for having me on the program. Budget 2019, what we have seen in the budget, they claim that it's 35 point something billion dollars, of which about 7.9 billion would be spent on drugs and medical supplies. Now, percentage-wise from previous year under this government, it hasn't varied a lot. And while it might look like a lot of money, it really is not, because how they're spending the money poses a problem. So under the PPP civic government, we had all the monies for drugs and medical supplies under the Ministry of Health. And they would go out and be able to buy. In that way, they're able to, because they're buying in bulk, they get it cheaper because of the scale of the purchase. What this government has done is that the central ministry would get some money for drugs and medical supplies. The Georgetown Hospital would get another portion. And then they send money out to each of the regions for drugs and medical supplies. in a very interesting way now, when they send the money to the region would use a substantial part of that money, and then by mid-year to the end of the year, they send back some of that money to the Ministry of Health. So you have this kind of circuitous kind of route where the money is going. So that's one confusion. The Auditor General's report for last year.
But before we get to the Auditor General's report, wouldn't that be, in your mind, a better system if you're, if you're decentralizing and
it's not.
allowing the regions to buy their own drugs and so on?
It's not, because what has happened, that's what I wanted to point out. The Ministry of Health, the price that the Ministry of Health centrally was paying for particular medication, similar medication was purchased by the people who were running Region 6. These are the functionaries in Region 6. And they paid 5 times as much as what the ministry was buying centrally for. So the point I'm trying to make is that by allowing some of these things to go like that, the prices in the regions would vary tremendously, and we are buying less drugs for more money. That's what it amounted to. You got other issues with the current way of how procurement is being managed by this government. You have issues with single sourcing of drugs. So they basically pick a vendor, go to them, and they give them the money, and they buy drugs from them. When you do that, part of the problem is that you're not getting a competitive price. So you might end up paying 5 times, 20 times, 30 times more for an item. We have cases where the Ministry of Public Health right now, they would have awarded contracts, single source contracts to people, and they didn't get approval from the tender board. All of these are gross violations. And then, of course, they manipulated the tendering system to be able to give some of their friends these huge contracts. A case in point is the HDML labs, where there were 6 people who were supposed to bid through a restrictive bidding process. Eventually 3 did. They disqualify all 3. They went over back the process and then awarded this guy a contract. I mean, so we have all these seemingly bizarre things that are happening, and they're all breaching the law of this country, the Procurement Act. And although we have been exposing it and raising it, what we need now to do is to make sure that some of these ministers go before the Privileges Committee or other action is being taken against them.
Based on what you said, are you optimistic, given your argument that you don't support or it's not effective, cost effective for each of the areas to buy their own drugs, and you pointed out the disparity in prices for the same drug.
Yeah.
Are you optimistic that with that on the table, I'm sure you would have made that argument publicly, are you optimistic that with Budget 2019 that system would change?
No, it's not going to change, and we're going to continue to see this type of squandering of resources. What we have over the last couple of years, while they've budgeted money for this, they've literally squandered the resources. And therefore, the patient is not benefiting. We know that because as we speak now, the Georgetown Hospital has shortages of drugs and medical supplies. You can probably go to any health center across this country and you will find items that are short. So we're putting money, but the patients who need to benefit from all that we're investing in, they're not getting that benefit because there are shortages in the system.
Let me come back to Dr. Ramsaran. You were talking about the doctors who would have graduated, and you were saying they are in the system, but you hinted that you may be unaware as to their welfare, as to whether they're housed properly, that kind of thing. Is there anything in Budget 2019 that addresses that concern?
Well, let me tell you quickly. For example, on the GPHC, the Georgetown Public Hospital Corporation, for buildings, I see 0. I had a quick glance at it. And I was wondering if they're not going to be repairing the buildings, especially the one in Kwame Street, which was such a boon for doctors, young doctors who cannot afford accommodation. So that used to be a good center. So in our discussions during the budget debate, we'll have to tease this out. Have they abandoned that? Look at it now. It's in shambles. It's the building there. So that used to house probably 30, 40, or even 50 doctors, depending if they're married. And that would have been a good comfort area for doctors. They have free accommodation. So we don't think the doctors are being treated as well as we had envisioned them when we sent them to Cuba. Not only were they supposed to get guaranteed employment, but when we deployed them, they were supposed to, in the regions, get certain accommodations and certain comforts. So we are by looking at the budget of the regions and even centrally, we're not seeing that the money is needed to take care of their accommodation, for example.
Part of the problem too with that we're seeing with doctors, we have invested tremendous amount of resources in training them, but after their 5-year contracts would have come to an end, many of these doctors are not renewing, and that is because of the conditions that currently exist within the system. And so eventually we're going to start losing them. They'll either go into the private sector locally or they migrate. And what we are being told is that of a number of the doctors whose contract have come to an end, they're not renewing. So that's one. The second thing is, under us, when a doctor worked overtime, that overtime allowance was not taxed. Under this government, they start taxing that allowance. And some of these doctors, they have to work, when you calculate the overtime, it's lots of hours. 60 hours, 70 hours sometimes. It's a lot of hours. And now when you start taxing that, the little benefit that they were getting suddenly starts disappearing. And some of them are saying, well, why should we be working these hours? Because we can opt out. But if they don't, then they'll have a problem. Who would cover the on-calls in the nights and so forth, right? So I heard the Minister of Finance mention that, we are going to rethink back this position. No strong commitment, but they probably are going to rethink the position.
So there's a possibility that it can be reversed?
Well, we are hopeful, but many of the doctors, the doctors had meetings with the Minister of Health, the Minister of Finance, bringing out a lot of these concerns. But still, we haven't seen any concrete resolution in this budget. Right now, when doctors are on call at Georgetown Hospital, there's a little room. So, when they don't have a patient or something, they can go there and get some rest. The conditions are deplorable, absolutely deplorable. If you got 10 or 15 doctors on call, some of them ended up sleeping in the car because you got a tiny room and it cannot accommodate all of them. Male and female have to share the same facility. That's an absolute no-no, right? Same toilet, same room, space, and everything like that. We can do better. How much money would it cost to just go and fix alternative accommodation for these young doctors who are on call?
Dr. Ramsaran, based on everything that that was said so far, would the PPP, through the two of you and others, be making representations for these things to be, if they weren't considered, to now be considered?
Well, we have already been doing that over the past few years, because when the doctors first confronted this change, this diminution of their rights or their benefits, they consulted with us and we consulted with them. And we will be continuing making those representations, for example, for them to be given better conditions when they are on call. Because remember, when you're on call or when you're doing overtime, you've already gone through a day of hard work and some very severe conditions, sometimes stressful conditions. Then you have to do it again in the night. And you're not getting the incentives as Dr. Frank Anthony just pointed out. So we've been fighting for that. But the doctors too are taking their own steps. They're getting organized. The young doctors are getting organized. They got to organize themselves in not a trade union, but an association, some kind of, so that they can point out gently to the minister's a doctor. So all we're hearing now, it's a bit surprising that one of the ministers of health is actually a doctor who was practicing not so long ago with an MPH. And it surprises us in the PPP of the callous nature of the approach to our doctors. These doctors should be treated as probably next to God, because we train them. The doctors are regarded as lifesavers, life givers, and we are alarmed that the attrition rate that they're leaving. Whereas if you check under our government, they were going into the programs, the postgraduate programs. That's another aspect. Positive aspect that the PPP already consolidated in this country. We have about 9 or 13 postgraduate programs. So our doctors coming back from Cuba and other parts so that we send them have the opportunity of staying here to go upwards. Now, we don't think the necessary incentives are being given to those programs. I was recently speaking to somebody associated with the guidance of that program, and that person was saying that they're not the explosion, the input that is needed is not the energies that the PPPC was putting into those programs is not there, it's waning. It's the people who are now in charge of the health sector don't seem to have the energies, the vision to see that we're creating our postgraduate doctors who will become more professors or teachers or specialists. So that's another aspect that we will be looking at.
In the remaining time left, quickly, one of the things that appeared quite often in the media was bonds for the storage of medicines and medical equipment and all of that. There was the famous Sussex Street bond. We were told that we should be off the budget. I believe it probably will be or is off the budget.
Well, we are not sure. You know this famous problem that we had, and that is the Sussex Street bond was mooted as being necessary and they should have extra storage space and all of that. And we discovered that one of the political investors in the government was given this contract where he literally took a bottom house, repaired it, and started storing medication. The Auditor General said to us that maybe up to August of this year, that bond was still in use. They have spent close to $280-something million in rent for that facility. That's a lot of money. And when we thought that this facility was closed, we now see other facilities being opened. So for example, we understand that they've now rented a space in Princess Street. So we have to ask questions now to figure out which facility now they have in Princess Street and how much they're paying for that. The Ocean View Hotel has now been turned apparently into a storage space for the Ministry of Health. They have rented apparently 7 rooms at Ocean View to now store medical supplies and maybe medicines. Now, these things are totally unnecessary because the Ministry of Health would have the diamond bond that is capable of storing a lot of these medication. And if they run out of space of diamond, they have regional bonds. In every region, there's a bond, there's a health bond. So they have space there as well. It is totally unnecessary and a total waste of money to go and rent these facilities to store medication.
But one can argue having a facility in the city may allow for quicker access to get drugs.
No, that's not necessarily so. The Georgetown Hospital has its own bond. So if you want one in the city, that one can adequately provide for whatever fluctuations in terms of dispensing and so forth. So once these things are properly managed, you shouldn't have shortages.
The government could also argue if you're going to close a bond, then they're losing space, so they will need to have space, so hence you close one, so there's a need for another one.
That's not true, because when they went to Sussex Street, it was totally unnecessary. That was a sweetheart deal that they gave to one of their political, as they call them, political investors, right? It wasn't necessary. When they move, they could have gone straight to the diamond facility. And so the need for there wasn't a need. They created an artificial demand, and then they paid this guy a whole set of money, right? And they're just wasting money. They could have shut down that deal when we exposed it. They allow it to run on, and now we are discovering that they have 2 other places that they are doing similar things. So this is a real outrage, total outrage.
Especially the one at the hotel he mentioned. or your audience should know this, there are woodants, we call termites, destroying millions of dollars of medication, which are already stored in suboptimal conditions at that hotel on the East Coast. Now, you mentioned that if you have everything in the city, you might get difficulties. And supply management is a science. So you don't wait until a hospital on the periphery. I was in charge of it. You already have people packing things, waiting for orders because you have what profiles of disease. There's a national profile of disease for malaria. Malaria is not treated differently in region 1 and region 2 and region 3. They're standard treatment guidelines. So the bond, even if the main bond or storing the facilities are in Georgetown, you don't wait a day or two before you send in supplies. As a matter of fact, the bond that the PPP created is so automated, so computerized. We can tell you that you have drugs there that you need to move on because they might be expiring, or that you need to shift, or you need to order. And we start packing them already. This is something huge. And there's a lot of American money, Uncle Sam money, USAID money, which was invested in that. So it's not something the PPP thought of.
You talk about a diamond bond?
The diamond bond.
Yes.
It was a massive investment to best in the Caribbean. Best in the Caribbean. It can be an example for how the private sector should run their business.
They have software that can tell you when you're stocking out. So these things are all programmed. So if Georgetown Hospital normally consumes, say, 20,000 aspirin per week or something, before that 20,000 aspirin is finished, it gives a little signal that Georgetown Hospital would need so much more aspirin to stock it up, right? So the software is there. How they're managing what they're doing, that's another problem. Because you see, if the thing is mismanaged, it creates artificial shortage. When it creates artificial shortage, then you go to emergency purchase of medication, where you single source, you pay sometimes 50, 100 times over the real cost of the thing, and people get kicked back.
All right, let's talk a bit about...
that destruction that is going on at that hotel, that is a criminal negligence. Somebody should be jailed for that. Suddenly we're hearing that there's a next bond at a hotel that woodants eating out your medications while Georgetown Hospital is suffering from medication.
Well, I'm sure you guys will bring awareness about that. Well, quickly, I'm told the budget is also catering for a treatment, all treatment program or treat all program as it relates to HIV, and this means that all persons who are affected will be treated across the board.
Well, you know, that would be a great thing. If we can have treat all in Guyana, that can be a really, really great thing. The international body, UNAIDS, for example, has established that by 2020, we should achieve what is called 90-90-90. And if we have achieved that 90-90-90...
Meaning what?
I'll explain that just now. Then by 2030, we can end the AIDS. And that's not only in Guyana, but across the world. Now, the first 90 is the amount of people who have HIV, right? Mm-hmm. So how many people we have in the country that have HIV and know their status, right? That's the first 90. The second 90, so what we want is 90% of the people who have HIV should know their status. The second 90 is 90% of those who know their status are on ARVs or are on treatment. And then the third 90 is that of those who are on treatment, the 90% that are on treatment, that 90 of those must be virally suppressed, right? So this is the ideal to have. Now, last year we heard, or this year we heard the ministers in their debate was saying, yes, we're going to do this treat all, and as soon as somebody is diagnosed with HIV, they're going to get treatment. But that's not happening. We estimate that there are about 8,200 persons who are HIV positive in Guyana. But the people who are getting treatment right now is probably about 5,000. So there's a gap. Right away, there's a big gap. So one of the things that the ministers say, there's this rhetoric of we're doing it, But the reality is totally different.
But come 2019, this is 2018. Come 2019 here, there is this measure here to treat all.
Exactly, but where is the budget to buy the medication for this other 2,000 patients?
Are you saying it's not there?
It's not there. It's not there. And even over the last years, they have been stocking out of ARVs. So when you put a patient on these set of medication, and then they come to the clinic and can't get the ARVs, you have a problem. Because now you got to switch around the medication, and that can help to develop resistance. Look, the PPP had a very strong program in terms of HIV. I think the whole country knew that. What is happening in this year's budget, the government has admitted that in the 20-year-old age group, that they're seeing an increase in incidence of HIV, meaning that more people are now getting sick with HIV. New cases. That means that there's a failure in the program. This government inherited something that was strong, and somehow they have mismanaged that.
But there is a possibility through the debates that I'm sure you would raise that. I'm sure. So there is a possibility that, given the disparity that you're talking about, that could be corrected. We're almost out of time, but there's one other thing I want to mention here, Dr. Ramsarran. I read, and you're the expert, I'm not, in terms of health measure, a measure to, the increased tax on imported cigarettes, to, as a measure to deter smoking. How do you see
sin
that?
tax, you call them,
Yeah.
taxes on alcohol and cigarette. It's one of the measures that is proven to be effective across the world. It's recommended. And, so it's generally one of those things that governments implement to get monies to deter you wanting to use a cigarette because it becomes more expensive. But there are many, many other things we got to do. For example, behavioral change, get into the schools. That's the key and critical thing. For example, under our administration, we were going to the schools and creating health clubs to get the kids themselves to say, we do not want to smoke, we do not want to drink alcohol. And the next thing that you should link with it is the sweet beverages that are getting into the schools.
Well, one of the things with this particular tax, and that's what the government should have done, when we collect taxes, this sin tax on tobacco, we should have earmarked the tax.
Linked.
So that all the monies collected from the consumption of tobacco, we should have put that to do health programs.
Okay.
Right?
So this is something
and more specifically, in some countries, what they've done is to put it for, say, treatment of cancer patients, to do research. So it's very specific. So it's not being collected and then put into the consolidated fund. It's collected and used to help to prevent some of the diseases caused by tobacco.
I guess this is a measure that can find common grounds among the MPs in Parliament.
I think so.
Yes, it's ground for discussion.
All right, let me thank you very much, gentlemen. We are just out of time. Dr. Bheri Ramsarran, former Minister of Health, and Dr. Frank Anthony, former Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport, both medical doctors, both members of Parliament, currently for the People's Progressive Party, the opposition party in the National Assembly. I'm Nian Suban, thanking you for watching.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Half